Hi everyone, I'm Nabil Hannan, Field CISO at NetSpy, and this is Agent of Influence. Today, we're really excited to have with us Nancy Brainerd. Nancy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So Nancy, why don't we get started? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you are today professionally.
Sure. I work for Medtronic, which is the world's largest medical device manufacturer in the world. So I have been there for 24 years. I've always lived in the IT space. And in 2006, I got the opportunity to move over to our security team. And just over time, got the ability to start building out different teams and functions. My focus was primarily around like cyber defense and incident response. And I earned this reputation of like enjoying having my hair on fire. I was pretty good at it. So that's been the primary focus of my career, although I'm sure everybody's aware that medical devices have been the target and scope of hackers lately. And so I recently had the opportunity about a year ago to move over to our product security team in corporate quality. So I get the privilege of working with our R&D teams and our developers on designing security into our medical devices. And it's been a really cool opportunity. And I joke that I'm finally at the adult table in life.
Well, it's been a fun working with you and your team over the years. And obviously, we've seen you go through that transition of being at enterprise security to now focusing more on product security. To me, it seems like a very large problem to solve when it comes to product security, when it comes to medical devices, because often organizations are growing through acquisitions. You have different products that do different things, and they all have different types of requirements, regulatory pressures, etc. Would love to learn from you what that transition process looked like for you, and what did you learn in terms of maybe similarities and differences between the two roles of enterprise security and product security? And also, what are some best practices that you've maybe adopted over the last 24 years that helps you better harmonize the initiatives that you have there?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a culture shock to move over. And in that time, I've been working with my old team to see, how do we overlap? How do we work together? Because there is a lot of overlap. So I think the first thing that we had to do was admit to ourselves that we're different. And really just kind of establish the fact that we have the same mission. Our what is the same, but it's the how that is different. And when I stepped into this role, I learned really quickly that a lot of what we do is really driven through regulatory requirements, compliance, and there's not a lot of wiggle room for how you are expected to comply. And so that's been a big culture shock. But for me, the biggest challenge as I looked to transition teams, but also make sure that both teams were adding value to our businesses, was making sure the businesses understood what we did and what services we could each deliver, because they were going to be done kind of in different ways. So we're working through a RACI right now, kind of a roles responsibility definitions, and it's never going to be perfect. But I expect that it would answer at least 90% of the confusion and the questions out there. So that's just one approach that we're taking. So that's really kind of the direction we're going.
When it comes to the medical device space, I think there's an added layer of complexity when it comes to patient safety, which is very different than most other businesses and what they have to worry about, especially if they're building software. And additionally, over time, I think there's a trend of where more things technologically are becoming software today that maybe traditionally was more hardware driven. And that also adds more complexity in terms of how do you ensure proper software integrity and make sure the systems are functioning as needed, with additional layers of complex connectivity as well, with cloud, cellular network, bring your own device to your device, or bringing a medical device home for home-based treatments. What are some main challenges now that you've shifted to the product security side that maybe you didn't anticipate seeing before? And how have you been able to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it's been a tough nut to crack. Historically, the patient safety and security were two distinct topics, and people would just religiously keep them separate. So, it goes back to interpreting regulatory requirements and how you interpret to be compliant with them. So, I mean, to us security professionals, it was pretty obvious. Like, you can't have patient safety without security. It's like a no-brainer. But again, it's cracking that nut of getting people to understand that. And regulators like the FDA and others have started to amend their language to make sure that companies like ours are not just focused on patient safety. They also want to see inclusiveness of security topics, and not just the impact to patient harm, but other, data sensitivity and other things like that. So that has helped, and that has helped to kind of drive some of the top-down mindset of why this topic is so important. I would say we still have to, and we will have to continue talking about scenarios where patient harm doesn't just include safety; it's also security, and talking about the consequences of poor security.
How hard is it really to foster a cultural change when it comes to getting the organization to shift its mindset that safety and security are truly interconnected?
Yeah, it's tough because companies like ours, we have such a focus on quality. We are delivering medical devices that are in the expectation for patient safety and efficacy is so drilled into our brains, and that everything that we follow is to the letter of the guiding regulations and everything. So when you try to insert topics that people, number one, they don't understand and they're confused by, it's intimidating. When you try to insert that, they tend to, reject that a little bit and not necessarily, they want to keep it separate. And so I think we're starting to finally see some of that change where, we have all this great foundation, we have all these great processes, we have this great quality system, and it's not going to impact it if we insert security into it. In fact, it's going to make it stronger. And so that's the approach that we've been taking. But you really have to do it in a way that shows you're not adding burden, you're not adding extra, rigor. Well, you are adding extra rigor, but you're not adding extra to the process. We're already doing what we do really well.
So when it comes to these devices in particular, a challenge I see is how rapidly the attack surface expands, especially when the growth tends to be more exponential in nature as you have more connectivity, like we talked about, more devices, more countries, and also different types of businesses being supported by different devices. What are some things you've done to ensure that you can successfully scale your initiatives across such a large product ecosystem?
We've seen over the past 10, 12 years as medical devices have come front and center from a cybersecurity perspective. We've played whack-a-mole for a lot of years, and we continuously just turn to this burning fire or that burning fire to react, whether it's to an actual security incident that is showing up in the industry or whether it's a new regulation that is being pushed out. We're reacting. And so I think the pivot for us in the past couple of years has been we need a strategy and a roadmap similar to what we would do on the IT side. And we've gotten to a point now where the maturity has to start evolving of not just security of the devices themselves, but of our programs. We've got to stop being less reactionary. We've got to be a lot more proactive. And that's where, companies like ours, we're building out strategies and keeping them very simple. We're focusing on what we call secure by design. So everything on the pre-market side, before a device even goes to the FDA for approval, how are we making that bulletproof from a security and safety perspective. The post-market side we call vulnerability vigilance, and making sure that those devices are monitored and managed and patched and everything throughout their life cycle to keep them safe when they're out in the field. Trust through transparency. This is a huge one. People initially are very skeptical of the way we've reacted. We were very defensive initially. Why would anybody hack medical devices? And so we've learned the hard way. You have to be transparent. You have to be engaged. And so being very transparent with our customers, our patients, being audit ready at all times for any topic that might come up. And then also just making sure our workforce, our winning workforce, is ready for this niche area of cyber. It does require custom expertise and tools and knowledge and everything that goes along with it. So those are the ways that we are expanding and trying to meet those demands. And also, we've got to stop thinking about these things like medical devices that nobody will want to hack. They are connected. They're in hospitals. They can be used against people and systems. And we've got to start threat modeling them that way.
Do you still find that people still have that mindset where they're questioning as to why an attacker would want to attack a medical device? Or have we moved past that today where people understand the risks there and they're willing to work with you from a security perspective?
They are. And I do think that the threat models have evolved of people aren't necessarily interested, and this is speculation, but I think what we've observed is that there's not a lot of interest in I'm not going to hack your pacemaker. There's not a lot. I'm not going to get anything out of that unless I really had something against you.
Yes.
So it's more, how can our devices be leveraged in like a hospital ransomware situation to create chaos for the hospital and then set up for that financial payout to the attacker. So honestly, when I think about kind of tiering the threat models, that's the one. I don't ever want to be the cause of a ransomware attack in a hospital.
I feel like there's a Mission Impossible movie scenario or something in there where someone walks by with the phone behind you and turns off your pacemaker and kills you and walks away. Yeah. And then Tom Cruise shows up trying to figure out what to do about it. I feel like it's a movie idea for another time. I want to go back to talking about some of the regulatory pressures that you mentioned earlier, especially with having such a broad range of regulations that are in scope with 160 countries or so that you had mentioned before that you have to adhere to. I'm curious to understand two things. One is, do those regulations often feel more like an obstacle than actually being helpful in you being able to build a resilient system? And secondly, do you feel like that's actually hurting innovation in some way?
I don't know that I would necessarily call them an obstacle. It is absolutely, it can be noise. And I kind of put it back in the category of like the firefighting. We're constantly looking to see what regulation or what law or guidance or standard is popping up in the industry. And like with any other industry, it can be really confusing. Like a lot of jurisdictions do have regulations or laws in place that we have to comply with. Others do not. They will simply reference either another jurisdiction's regulations or something. And then you have countries recently like Japan, where they latched on to a new standard, an IEC standard, to say, we're just going to follow this. And so while that's great, I'm really happy that Japan isn't reinventing yet another wheel. It's still something that's out there that we have to be paying attention to and folding into our policies and procedures and whatnot. So I think with anything, I don't care what industry you're in, everybody wants to see a more consistent, holistic set of rules. Like, just tell me what we need to do, whether I'm in Japan or South America. It doesn't matter. I just want a consistent set of rules. And how do we, honestly, in the spirit of everything we're trying to do, protect the patients with secure devices? That should be the goal, instead of all these conflicting policies.
So specifically talking about building resilient and secure devices themselves, I had the pleasure of playing some golf with you at the Nets by Charity golf event a few months ago. And you were, I don't know where that trophy is, but I'll make sure we get it. We should have gotten it out for the recording. We had we had a really good conversation there during the golfing event where you mentioned that you are getting prepared to go to DEF CON and take some of your products to the DEF CON hacking village, and how nerve-wracking that is, how stressful that is, but also how fun and exciting that would be to be able to do that at a big hacker conference like DEF CON. Would love to understand from you, what are some things you learned through that process? And are there anything you would have done differently now that you've been through that process once?
Yeah. So it's so funny. DEF CON is such a bittersweet topic for us because this is how we got on, in the public eye, with somebody showing up at, was actually Black Hat, but ultimately DEF CON, showing how our devices were vulnerable to a cyber attack. So at first we were very defensive. It was, we were kind of caught on our back foot. But along the way, we're like, nope, we're gonna change the narrative here, and we're gonna embrace this community. And so what we've done over time is you got to get your leaders involved early. You got to get the communications people involved early, the regulatory people, legal. Always got to have the lawyers, front and center. But it was all really important. I would say the biggest challenges that we had was convincing our leadership why it was such a good idea to take our devices into the most hostile hacker environment on the planet, and let them test our products. So that was probably the biggest challenge. And once we've gotten over that, we've had some really good success, and we've seen the benefits. We've gotten good feedback from our customers, our peers, our government partners that are there observing it and whatnot. So that's all been a huge win for us, and we now embrace it. And I think I honestly think people need to get over that fear, and embrace it.
I think this highlights a unique thing that you've uncovered here with leadership buy-in. I think this kind of leads to treating security as a competitive differentiator.
Correct.
And I feel like it should happen more often, and I don't see it happening more often. Maybe people are struggling to get the messaging across that way, or maybe it's because it's hard to show security as a differentiator because you can invest a lot in security, but ultimately it's not like you get a new feature or something new and flashy that you can show off after making that much of an investment. So what advice would you have for others who are trying to maybe think ahead and treat security as a competitive difference?
Yeah, I don't want to say I'll disagree with you, but I'll slightly kind of modify that a little bit. From a healthcare industry perspective, we've actually kind of embraced the notion that we're not going to compete with each other when it comes to security. We have to be on the same team, and honestly, like right before I came here today, I was on the phone with a competitor sharing ideas about how to do metrics, something silly like that. So I do think that showing up at DEF CON and being very public and visible challenges my other peers in the industry to step up and do the same. But I think security is table stakes. And I don't ever want to publicly say our security is better than theirs, A, because that would make me a target. But B, again, I don't want to send that message out that we're competing with each other when it comes to something as critical and important as that. I want people to know we're working with each other to make this a better ecosystem for the healthcare environment.
That's really refreshing to hear. And I actually think that's extremely rare in our industry today, even though I believe that the leaders are maybe the most senior leadership across some of the most competitive industries are collaborating in some sense, but there's still that spirit of competition to try and outdo others. Whereas in the medical space, I think it's an altruistic cause where you're trying to help people live better quality of life and help them deal with diseases and other ailments that they're trying to get over. And having that sense of collaboration within the space, I think, is really admirable. And that's actually fantastic to hear. I guess if I can now shift my question a little bit is, how can we encourage other industries to also be more collaborative versus competitive?
That's a great question. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head about, I do think, and what I've seen is that healthcare is unique in that, we have a common mission, we have a common goal. I, I, I do think that that is going to be, if you want to say it that way, the competitive advantage that we have over other industries and in promoting that. So we belong to different information sharing groups, and there is different information sharing groups based on industry, like healthcare, retail, financial, aviation, et cetera. And we have heard the healthcare information sharing groups are the most engaged, the most collaborative, and it's just by nature. And so I think I don't know if I can answer your question, but I do think it is driven primarily just because of the common mission we have.
Now, this is maybe due to my own ignorance. I would love to be educated better on this from you. If the medical device companies are being this collaborative, are the hospital systems and the hospitals also being equally collaborative when they're working on different challenges? Absolutely.
In fact, I had a call last week with one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States, working about how do we work better together to get requirements up front. And honestly, that's where it gets a little bit more towards the how do we speed up a sales cycle, because they're assessing us based on our security, and we're trying to meet their requirements, and it's a lot of back and forth cat and mouse type things. But there is a way for us to actually be a little bit more engaged and collaborative about us sharing with them the security of our devices. And when you buy a medical device, it's not like buying an IT system. Like, there might be a hard-coded password in there. There might be, there might not be antivirus running on it because it can't. So these are the kinds of conversations that you have to have with the healthcare providers to make sure that they understand. So yeah, I wouldn't limit it to medical device manufacturers. It is the whole ecosystem: pharma, insurance, everybody.
So when it comes to this space, a thing that fascinates me is I've heard, and you can maybe confirm or deny if it's true or not, I've heard that doctors are the worst users from a security perspective.
They are.
And when they don't want to remember passwords, they don't want to go through the security steps, et cetera, which is understandable because their job is not to be worried about figuring out how to be secure. Their job is to treat patients, and their job is to perform a certain procedure or surgery, et cetera. And when they're doing that, they can't be bogged down with security controls that are preventing them from caring for their patients.
Correct.
So the question I have for you in this space is, given that specific challenge where the users of your medical devices in many cases may be averse to wanting security controls, what are some things that you have to consider to make sure that you're still able to secure those systems, because that's still necessary to happen?
Yeah, the same way you have to look at it like with your employees and how they hate, having to change their password every 90 days or, so we come up with like biometrics and other things to make it easier for them to authenticate and get into their systems securely. It's the same thing from the doctor's perspective. Although I'll say on the medical device side, it's probably even a little bit more formalized how we gather those, user requirements, what we call the non-functional requirements of using one of our medical devices. Like, we know what the intended use of a defibrillator is, but if it has a power on password and you have a patient, on the table that needs to be, defibbed,
having a heart attack,
and the doctor can't get in the password. So it's things like that where you want to understand all of those different scenarios and use cases and make sure that, okay, maybe not a power on password, but it's going to have an encrypted database or something. I'm making that up. But what other compensating controls do we have to be creative about to protect that device?
So, you've been very successful in your career, and being a woman in cybersecurity, it's still a very male-dominated role. You've paved the way for many women who look up to you and maybe want to be in a similar role as you are. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's definitely still a very male-dominated world. Although I will say, when you go to a security conference, there's never a line in the ladies' room, so there's that benefit for now. It's not an excuse, but I think as I look back on my own career and some of the different kind of pivotal milestones that I saw, I had a sponsor early on, and I didn't even realize it. And a sponsor isn't necessarily somebody that you can just go out and ask, hey, can you sponsor me? Can you be my advocate when I'm not around and help promote my career aspirations? But I do think that you can be cognizant and aware of people in your immediate periphery that are interested in what you're doing, that do pay extra attention to what you're doing, and lean into that and make sure that they're seeing all of your contributions, your successes and whatnot, and then hope for that person to be an advocate when you're not around. I think there's a lot of other different, things that people can do, get mentors and all that. But personally, now that I'm at the stage in my career I'm at, I love spending time with the younger generation and encouraging them that might be timid about getting into the space. It's intimidating, and just paying a little extra attention to that generation and coaxing them in and making them see that there are women in leadership roles in this space.
Do you have any advice for women on how to approach identifying the mentors and the sponsors? And often I think you have to also ask for support and help, which is often challenging because you don't know who to ask for help. What advice would you have for someone who's looking for a mentor and looking to learn and have them be an advocate for them?
Yeah, I mean, so mentorship and sponsorship are different, and mentorship I think is a little easier. Look for those strong, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a female mentor. Look for those strong leaders around you, and not even in your direct chain, but in your organization. Like who impresses you at a town hall, who impresses you at a staff meeting, and I think people don't realize that they're going to be complimented. They're going to be, that they're going to take that as a compliment that you look up to them, and they're going to say yes. Unless they're swamped, crazy busy, they're going to say yes to being a mentor. Sponsors, I think, are harder. You can't necessarily ask somebody to sponsor you, but again, I think it's about understanding and realizing like who is acknowledging and recognizing your achievements, your accomplishments, and just getting yourself more and more aligned with that person. And like I said, they will be your voice when you're not in the room and speak up for you.
I often find that as you get more senior through your career, taking on more and more leadership responsibilities, there has to be a time when you have a shift in mindset in how you're approaching your career and how you're going to pave the way for the next few years. Can you share with us a little bit on maybe an incident or a time when you had to do a shift in your mindset on how you were approaching your career trajectory and how that impacted you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was the deputy CISO at our company for 4 years, and I mean, if that's not a clear career path, I don't know what is. So we had some unexpected leadership changes about a year and a half ago. Things didn't necessarily work out the way I was expecting, and I was not automatically I was not automatically the successor to that CISO position. So, and it was around that time that I was starting to look into this product security discipline within my organization, and a position had opened up. And so I took it, and I look back, and yeah, I was extremely disappointed. I was extremely frustrated and upset that I was passed over for this role. And I look back though, and it was the best career decision I ever made. And I'm learning so much. Like I said, I feel like I'm actually I feel like I'm contributing, and I am contributing to the Medtronic mission, which is really cool, and it feels really good. And I just think my advice to people is, don't be discouraged by a left-hand turn if it comes up, and embrace it. You can have your career goals, but be flexible, be prepared.
Sometimes a detour might be the best way to go. What about as a community? Any advice for our community as a whole on how we encourage more diversity in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I think we have to be very intentional about being sponsors, being mentors. So people can't necessarily ask you to be sponsors, might not ask you to be a mentor, but you can intentionally be that for somebody that you admire, that you think is strong. And also, I think just getting as engaged as possible with the younger generation, whether they're, prior picking their career paths or whether they're already in some sort of, corporate role or whatever the case might be. It's intentionally kind of focusing on them and guiding them. I'm not saying that very well, but I think it's just really about, we have to be more intentional about giving them voice opportunities and different things that we might not have had.
So having been in the industry for so long, are there signs that you're seeing that's giving you hope that we're headed in the right direction today?
The jury is out, definitely. Well, the industry in general, I mean, there's all of this weird talk about, CISOs becoming obsolete and different things like that. So if the jobs are becoming obsolete, then so are the, opportunities for DEI. So it's kind of like a snowball effect. So I think we were getting there, and now it feels like the industry itself is starting to back off a little bit, but yeah.
So before we wrap up, I always like to talk to our guests about things they like to do outside of work, outside of security. So what are some things you have going on right now that you're doing in your spare time?
Well, I am a huge golfer. I'm not good at golf, but I golf a lot. And so that's primarily, what my husband and I are doing. If we're traveling, we're golfing. Golf season is over here in Minnesota, but we'll be trying to make a few winter trips. But yeah, golf is my escape, and I'm a little competitive, so it's it's fun to kind of mix those two together sometimes. And yeah, I love it. It's a good life sport. You just meet a lot of cool, interesting people, and get to spend a couple hours with them, and it's a good time.
I think you're being awfully humble by saying you're not good at golf.
Well,
I would beg to differ. That being said, being good at golf is a very relative term.
Correct. Exactly.
Depending on who you talk to and what your aspirations are.
Correct.
My aspiration when it comes to golf, similar to you, I like playing golf. I love being out on the golf course, but I'm not necessarily very good at it. That being said, I would like to think I can keep up with anybody and not slow them down.
Exactly.
And that's my end goal when it comes to golf.
Exactly.
Anyways.
Exactly.
So we've had the opportunity to play, but when it comes to golf, do you have a favorite golf course or a favorite round of golf that you've played?
I've gotten the opportunity to play a lot of really cool golf courses. Probably the favorite place I've been to is I was at Pebble Beach a couple years ago and got to play, and it was windy. It was like 40 degrees. Raining sideways, but it was incredible, and it was a memory I'll never forget.
It's definitely on my bucket list. I've done the drive. I think there's a 17-mile drive,
yes,
which is considered the most scenic drive in the U.S.
Correct.
And I actually took a picture with the clock that's outside of Pebble Beach, but I've never had a chance to play. But it's on the list.
It's on the list.
Hopefully I'll get there someday. Good. Well, Nancy, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful and a pleasure to talk to you as always.
Yeah.
And I hope we get to do this again really soon.
Same. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find more episodes on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at netspy.com/agent of influence. If you want to be a guest or want to recommend someone, then please reach out to us at podcast@netspy.com. And as always, stay proactive, my friends.